Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I know you've had a long day and it's getting even longer. We're behind schedule, but there is an imperative in Irish conferences that we end them on the same day they started. Well, Ger Gilroy's already told you who's on the panel, and we've got an hour. So therefore we've got to get as much in as we can. That may leave little or no time for questions. It depends how this goes to get it done within the hour. What we have is we have players, manager of soccer, and then we have two medics. With everybody's permission, I'm going to take the medics first, in a sense, to sort of set the scene, as it were, in relation to concussion in sport and their thoughts. Then I'm just going to move on to Brian Kerr, just to get an alternative vision of how another sport looks at it, and then we have the three younger members of the audience who are going to give it a very personalised view. So that's a kind of the way I've kind of structured the thing for the moment. It's going to be, I think, we should try and get some cross talk, gentlemen. If you feel you want to come in, I think you should feel that way, that it's not like 6 separate presentations. I have no role other than keeping it clean. Barry O'Driscoll, graduate of Manchester University, doctor in Manchester, for a decade and a half involved with the Irish Rugby Union, hugely involved in the medical side of the game as well, and suddenly you go, you leave, you resign. Why? And then question number 2, I'd like you to sort of address, of course, for us in rugby and those critically involved in it, is the whole idea, what does the 5-minute assessment do for the safety of our players? Now, I'd like you maybe to address both those points, perhaps, to kick off and then go wherever you want.
Thank you, George. I just got sent this morning a paragraph I want to read. I'll answer the question first, but it's a vital paragraph that someone sent me from a sports research. But to answer what George said, that I resigned from the IRB and from the IRFU 2 years ago. At the time, it was a big blow to me because I was on the medical committee, I was on the anti-doping committee, I was on the discipline committee, I was very, very involved. I resigned over the 5-minute assessment, and the one which really swung me was that the IRB introduced this 5-minute assessment in teenagers. Quite an incredible thing to do. When you heard about Michael, and you heard Chris talking this morning about the second impact syndrome, and we know about Ben Robinson, the thought that they introduced this research, this trial in teenagers when there was no basis for it, no clinical or no medical basis, no rugby basis. So I went. Since then, I've been horrified by the message that this has sent out to the world of sport. Just when all this information is coming through about concussion, the message it's sent through to all sports, and I'm so glad the GA have turned it down, is that you can trivialise concussion, that there is some way that someone with suspected concussion, that it can be ruled out in 5 minutes. Frightening message, because most of the sporting world know very little about concussion, but they now know that you can come back in 5 minutes under certain circumstances. Now that is really open to abuse, and it's been already abused in rugby. So the message we sent out, and this is the IRB, who have got a tremendous record for the welfare of the player, for looking after the player, their health, and their research, and suddenly out of the blue they do this. Now, I think you all know, most of you, that in the last couple of months, that £500 million has been settled by the NFL on their players because of all the stuff that Chris told us. And what it was settled for was misrepresentation of concussion. And this is exactly what the IRB have done now. They have misrepresented every statement. When I've spoken recently, when I've been on seminars like this, they put a statement the next day saying the IRB has based all this on best research evidence. Not true. No research evidence. No one else has ever done it. Best world practice. Not true. It's not practiced by anybody else. We have had the advice of the world's leading neurologists. Where are they? What's their name? Why aren't they here today? So they have, in fact, misrepresented the whole thing. This trial is not a rugby trial. This is a medical trial, pure and simple a medical trial that takes place in a small laboratory underneath the stand. And if you see the protocols that they have produced for this trial, they contradict each other, they're conflicting, and my medical colleagues here will not believe it. They actually guarantee the player going back with brain damage that he's at no risk. Now, I mean, this is an abuse of medical principles. I'm sorry. You cannot do that. All of us who've done research, and you know the information that's given to a patient. This is a patient who is told that he's taking part in a trial which has never been done before. He's going back onto an arena of sheer brutality, and he's not at any risk. The lawyers are queuing up at the door, and I'm very, very sad about it. And it's completely flawed. Whenever I've made statements or talked to someone like this, the next day they come out and the press asks them, but what about Barry or Driscoll? We do not deal with individual opinions. That shows the level of their confidence. They don't deal with individual opinions. But I've given objective statements there. There is one individual opinion they do agree with. And that's Dr. Robert Cantu, who's Chris's partner in the Boston Centre for Research on Concussion, the world-famous centre where all the basic research has been done and it's advanced there. And in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in August, the IRB stated, we are following the guidelines of Dr. Robert Cantu, the return to play guidelines of Dr. Robert Cantu. 4 weeks later, Dr. Robert Cantu stated, and it's all down in writing, the 5-minute test is flawed. It is irresponsible. It prevents the player getting proper medical care, and rugby is going to finish up in trouble because of it. This is the man that they have stated they're going to follow his example on it. The thing is, they're claiming now, and the IRFU have produced a very good document this week on concussion and on return to play. 10 times in 6 pages, they emphasise any suspicion of concussion, you do not return to play. Any doubt, you do not return to play. It's a very good document. It doesn't mention the 5-minute assessment because this is, they don't want to shout about it too much because this is going on in the major professional game, which is ironic because we just saw a terrific talk from Professor Gillespie about the powers and Newton's law and that, and they're not going back into the game I played in where we used to run for the gap, and everybody ran for the gap. This game now is you run for the man ahead of you. They're 2 stone heavier, they're much faster, so the power is immense, and you have to take out 8 or 10 men before you then start to run it. So you're sending a man back to an arena of really, really big trauma. They say, and I take John Ryan's point fully, that going on as a doctor, it can be, a bit, and you don't get a lot of time to assess. Before I resigned, I established with the director of referees at the IRB that anyone who went down and didn't get up or had a query of a head, the refs would hold the game up for 2 minutes. I know they're not doing it now, but they will do it. But the essential thing here is, and what the IRB is saying, they have to take them off to assess to make the diagnosis of concussion. You cannot diagnose concussion. There's no empirical test for it. Chris referred to it. There's no blood test. John Ryan referred to it. The King-Devick test for rapid eye movements is a development that might come soon, and there might be blood tests. And this is where the huge mistake is. You're talking about suspicion here. Now, you suspect it as soon as you get to the player. Because if you don't leave the player within 2 minutes, you really are suspecting it. And that is exactly the difference. You are not diagnosing out there. You're just suspecting.
Okay, Barry, can I hold you there?
Yeah.
This is a very important point. Can I just follow through with horse racing? Because jockeys, I remember looking, I think, at a picture of Scudamore, and he'd broken every bone in his body. So presumably his head hit the ground on occasions before his body did, and I wonder what reaction that had. And therefore, at the Turf Club, you're a senior medical advisor, Dr. Adrian McGoldrick. It's important because Barry's view is intensely personal, and as are all views here. Do you concur, or have you a different view based on your experience with jockeys?
We go by Zurich 4 SCAT guidelines. When SCAT 4 came in, was published in April of this year, it sets out very clearly that you do not do an assessment for a concussion for a minimum of 10 minutes. We immediately changed our rules. We would have 2,000 to 2,500 fallers per year. All of our riders must be assessed for concussion, but I've set down guidelines that they're not assessed for a minimum of 15 minutes after their fall. They will be assessed for all other trauma, but as regards being assessed for concussion, that is delayed for 15 minutes, mandatorily. If I have a query with regards to a fall, what I do is I go into the stewards room, they'll replay the fall for me in slow motion so I can see exactly what has happened. And we were just discussing this over lunch. There's no reason why not they don't have access to rapid replay in slow motion of a rugby player's injury to see exactly what is going on. It's a clinical assessment. Currently there are no biomarkers, there are no other tools to make a diagnosis. It's a clinical diagnosis by the doctor on the spot. So you have to use a combination of your own intuition, the clinical signs, but there is no other tool bar your own medical knowledge to make that assessment, but you cannot make it within 5 minutes. It breaches every rule. IRB or the IRB signed up to SCAT 4, signed up to Zurich 4. They're one of the main signatories to it, in which it states specifically you do not assess for 10 minutes. I cannot understand how they could have a tool there saying that you can do it in 5. It breaches everything.
Okay, Dr. McGowan, do you mind me asking you a question? Because for us rugby people, like Barry and others, would have come to concussion only with little over a decade ago when the game changed dramatically with professionalism and other law changes and so on. But fellas have been falling off horses since Royal Tan, or, you know, in the National. That's as far back as I can go. You should have more experience in reality than rugby, should you not?
We do. I think we have. I mean, we have 2,500 fallers a year. We assess them all for concussion. We would only have, on average, about 30 diagnosed concussions per year, but we do very regular assessments for them. But certainly, as I mentioned at a conference two weeks ago, I had a fall in Galway about 5 weeks ago. At 5 minutes, he appeared perfectly normal. At 10 minutes, he couldn't find a seat in the weighing room. He failed 2 post-concussion tests, and when I finally did an MRI in his brain, he'd bled into his parietal area. But at 5 minutes, he was perfectly normal. And I think that proves very emphatically, you know, assessing in 5 minutes is not correct.
Lest we get bogged down in the 5 minutes, and I happen to share Dr. Driscoll's passion about it as a layman. But one of the things we might be talking about with these players is going back on the field. I mean, as before you got smarter, if you like, about concussion in jumping, there must have been jockeys who jumped in the 3 o'clock and went back in the 3:30. No,
absolutely. I mean,
so when did you really get?
4 years ago, we changed our guidelines 4 years ago.
Okay.
With the help, I must say, of my good colleague Jack Phillips down here and his wife Mairead. I took over 6 years ago, and having reviewed the guidelines, which were based on the old Bob Cantor guidelines, but as our knowledge of concussion has evolved, we've got much more smart about concussion. But the one thing I will say that in Western Europe, we are 10 years behind America. We are light years behind America. In America, you go to any major medical conference, it will be the number one item on the agenda. I go to a conference in Ireland of my own faculty, and it mightn't be on the agenda at all. We are so far behind in our getting information out to mainly to our doctors. I reckon the vast majority of doctors could not diagnose concussion, being very honest with you.
Just again, Barry talked about teenagers. He was very concerned that young people were using the same test. I don't know how racing works, but you wouldn't have very young people, or would you? I mean, like pony clubs or whatever, you know, show jumping. People must come off horses. Is there a similar protocol?
Turf club, I'm involved with Turf club. We give license from 16 upwards. So we don't deal with anybody under 16. Obviously, under the new Zurich 4, there's obviously a junior SCAT and obviously the adult SCAT. So to cover the young people and for the more senior people. So I'm not involved with the junior people, and I don't work at that other
Very
events.
quickly, yeah.
Exactly what Adrian said. The IRFU document, which is very good, only applies to the adults. They've got different rules for the pitch side assessment doesn't apply to them. But I just want to confirm that he talks about SCAT4. This is the Zurich document, and it takes 20 minutes. And I think I'm right, Chris, that SCAT4 is used in NFL, that SCAT4 is used in AFL in Australia, where they have revolving substitutes, and they can keep a guy off for half an hour. And that is the document they use. What rugby uses, I don't know where they got this. I don't know where they plucked it from. Nobody can understand why they made up this 5-minute assessment. It is worthless.
Okay, Brian Kerr, the only danger to somebody getting concussion in soccer is when they dive in the penalty area and they might hit their head.
I thought you might say something like that.
But actually...
You must have got a few bangs when you were playing rugby, George. Mads, have you examined George? No? Go ahead, sorry.
No, I have an interesting point. No, there is actually...
I'm sure you have.
No, there's method. No, there's
Could we get to it?
There's method in my madness. The great Tommy Lawton, who was one of the greatest centre-forwards in the history of the English game, suffered, and as many others, old soccer players of an older era did, because they were heading a very heavy ball, which the old Gilbert, when it got wet or whatever, it was like heading a concrete block. So forget my smart alecky remark at the beginning. I do you in soccer for this experience because you've better balls now, the players play with rather than you. Better equipment, that's better put. And what is the incidence of concussion in your sport?
Well, there's a couple of points I'd like to make. Now, forget about you. On the concussion one, I'll deal with that. The two sports that I'd have a biggest interest in this issue would be boxing and football. The reason I'd have an interest in boxing is my father was a boxer. And he took a few punches in his time. And I know in the medical profession there would be a general... there wouldn't be a lot of good feeling towards boxing. And amazingly, in his time, he used to manage a boxing team that was composed of doctors and students in UCD, or Trinity rather, for many years. And many of his best friends were boxers. I don't think my father was actually damaged by the boxing, but I think in professional boxing there isn't any doubt that the frequency of the blows and the heaviness of the blows and the lack of protection. Amateur boxing, I'm not so sure if there is any permanent damage. When you look at a lot of the guys later in life, you would say no. On the other side of it, in soccer, sadly, some people that I've known very well in my younger life, in their older days, I have begun to suspect that the damage that you refer to, if you take it that only boxing and soccer are the two sports where you actually use your head for contact, like in boxing, you're supposed to use your head to stay out of the way, but the reality is a lot of guys seem to use their head to take a few punches and to feint for the next one and then go for it. So they're using it. They're constantly in a situation where they're getting blows and bangs and movement of neck muscles and whatever damage that does. But in soccer, and it still pertains to this day, and just bring me dad back into it again, he actually worked in Dunlop's making footballs in the 30s. And he used to have footballs at home when I was a kid. And a lot of you in the room may be old enough to remember the ball with the lace on it, right? And when you gave it a belt to your head, you went, Jesus, that they really had that. And it used to absorb the moisture. It was a leather ball that absorbed the moisture. In fact, some teams around the country used to steep the ball. And I think there might have been the team in Cork, George, actually, who used to steep the ball and advance the match when they were playing the dubs, you know, when we sort them out. And a great friend of mine said they used to steep the ball for a week, and when the match would start, you'd be hoping your team wouldn't get a corner because no one wanted to kick the ball of cement. But if it came over in the air, you didn't want to head it, because then you'd have a bit of dizziness after heading it. Now, that's gone on for years, and I've been disappointed that doesn't seem to be an awful lot of medical research has been done on the brains of those guys who have been dying, like Tommy Lawton and John Charles and the fellow Tony Haley, the players of that era, who spent a lot of their training sessions heading these balls. If you watch the next soccer match here or anywhere else, you'll see before every match for 10 minutes, the centre-backs sometimes the centre forward, most of the centre backs will have someone for 5 minutes throwing the ball up to them to header or kicking it from long range to header, repeatedly header. They do it in training every day. I'm sure there is some damage is coming from that, and I don't think anyone is saying much about it. The title of this is Make the Concussion Call, Whose Responsibility Is It? It has to be the medical people's responsibility. The incident with Spurs recently, the goalkeeper, Hugo Lloris, he got a bang from Lukaku in a tackle. And afterwards there was a long discussion because Spurs put him back on the pitch. AVB, Andre Villas-Boas, put him back on the pitch. And it seemed to be against the common medical feeling at the time. I think what happens is the coach, I've never been like this myself, but I've known coaches who the medical team were a bit afraid of. I wasn't one of them. I've known guys in clubs, one or two of them have retired in England lately, and the medical staff would have been afraid of them. And if a player was injured and he come off the pitch with a bit of a bang, the manager would say, get him back on, he's all right, get him back on. That's how it works. Now, I don't know any sporting organisation, when they sacked the manager, who said, by the way, we're sorry we lost the match, but we're really happy that you protected that player's health for the future. They don't give it a fiddler fuck. They want to win the match as much as you want to win the match. They're happy enough. So it has to be the call. And how we've got to deal with it in the sport I'm involved in is it's got to be taken away from the doctors and the physios directly involved with the teams concerned. There must be an independent medical person who says, I'm telling you, ref, he's got to go and he can't come back on. I'm telling you, coach, he's off. That's the end of the story. There's no more discussion about it. It's not the managers, it's not the coach or the manager or the doctor that's with the team. The doctor with the team, his judgment is flawed by being in the dressing room with the rest of the players and the staff and the fans and all the money aspects of it. They've got to be cut out of it, and it's got to be independent, much like your role, Adrian.
I mean, I'm independent. I'm employed with the Turf Club, even though I would know the jockeys work very closely with them. My other 10 other Turf Club doctors, we are independent of the jockeys. And so it's very easy for us to make a call, a definitive call, and be able to walk away. I think in rugby or in any other sport, not just rugby, GA, soccer, because you're employed by the club, in essence, you're part and parcel of them. And it's very, very difficult, particularly if you got pressure from your coach, to keep a player on the pitch. I think I have a lot of sympathy for doctors involved in rugby. There's the pressure they're under. I have
sympathy for doctors involved in soccer and with teams that I was involved in and matches I was involved in where there was a call on that. But it isn't quite. It's normally an incident between two fellas clash their heads going for a ball in the air, or a goalkeeper goes at someone's feet like the Loris. It's not as common as you would have within horse racing where jockeys go down, or in rugby where the hits and the game has changed, and it's not as common as that, but it's still very, you don't want to be using up a substitution because a fella got a bang in the head. And I'm sure the lads who are playing still have been in that situation where the coach makes a decision and you feel an obligation to go back and play your part, even though down the line it may be a problem.
Thanks for that neat segue, Brian, towards the players. It draws me immediately to get the players involved. I remember being in Aberdeen once and talking to a member of the Scottish National Party who said Irish Gaelic was different from Scottish Gaelic. We have a perfect example of it here. A fella calls himself Lamont, whereas, of course, we really know that it's Lamont in Irish Gaelic. Rory, Lamont, you've had a few bangs, have you? And what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, in my career I've had, I was knocked out cold, clean out, sort of 10 occasions. I had dozens more concussions on top of that. So I feel like I know the concussion experience pretty well, also know the assessments very well, and the whole return to play, sort of graduated return to play protocol very well. So I feel like I'm qualified to speak about this, and all through my career I was pretty concerned. Because I got to experience it so often, I could see the flaws in the system. And the current attitude in rugby is, within the players and coaches, is appalling, really. Same attitude to any other injury. They treat concussion like any other injury, and it's that strap it up attitude that you can play through it. Players don't always believe that they need to report it. Players also will talk about deliberately setting a low score on the baseline test, which is, it's not, you know, when they talk about setting the base low score, so if they're ruled out with a concussion, it's not so hard to pass it, so they can get back after a concussion sooner, not miss so many games. But set a low baseline. You know, when I was setting my baselines, my scores would vary massively from year to year, just depending, not because I wanted to set a low baseline, but just because depending on how I was feeling, was I fatigued, was I tired, how much sleep did I have the night before, my scores changed all the time. So I don't know how accurate a baseline score is for predicting whether a player is still suffering from concussion. So the problem with that, you've got a six-day minimum exclusion right now. So players can get concussed in the game, be pulled off, and then they go through the assessments. And because they might have set a low baseline for whatever reason, whether it was deliberate or it was fatigue when they set it, they pass the assessments in the week and they get back onto the pitch 6 days after being knocked out. You see this all the time. Happened in the Autumn International. I don't think we can treat these assessments like they're 100% safe and accurate. I think that 6-day exclusion is not long enough. I think it needs to, until we have more reliable assessments, we need to return to the 3-week minimum exclusion to minimise any risk.
Just because, yes, you are sitting next to Barry O'Driscoll. Barry played rugby in the amateur era, so if you were playing for Manchester and Barry was the fullback and you were the centre and you said, you know, and you had your 10th knockout, I mean, Barry just wouldn't have let you play. He would have walked you off the pitch and he said, don't come back for a month. I mean, how have you been able to come back? You've just told us here that you've been knocked out. Did you say knocked out cold 10 times?
10 times, yeah.
Well, how did you keep playing?
Well, I spent my professional career playing for 5 different teams. So I had 4 club teams and a national team, all with different medics. So none of the medics would know unless they're going to go through all my medical records. And just like, you know, I had 16 operations in my 10-year career. My medical records are like an encyclopedia. So to expect them to be able to scour through it and pick out every concussion from all the, you know, and to expect, you know, in France it wasn't always when I played it too long.
Do you mind if I ask you a hard question?
Yeah.
Weren't you a bit dumb, if you don't mind me saying so? Like, I mean, you're a sportsman, so you would have read books and magazines and all this, and you'd read about all these professional heavyweight boxers who couldn't remember their name and were now shaking hands outside casinos in Las Vegas or whatever. Did it not strike you at any time, hold on here, this is my brain, no? Did that never strike you?
Yeah, I thought in 2008 I considered I had a real bad concussion playing against England in Six Nations, and sort of had 9 fractures to the face, and I was sort of unconscious for a long time, and I was in a seizure. And after that experience, I'd considered it, but you know, I didn't get any medical advice, and my understanding of concussion was so limited. I didn't even know there was any long-term implications with concussion. Obviously. Yeah, you know about the punch-drunk boxers at that stage, but they're boxers. You know, this is rugby. It's not the same. I'm not getting punched in the head all the time. I didn't even know the dings we talk about, the dizziness, the ringing in your ears, the tinnitus. I didn't know those were concussions. I had dozens of those. I'd get that experience every other game or every 3 games. It's like, so you don't, because you don't understand, you just don't. And as a player, we're just not informed. And it's only just now, I think, this summer, there's been so much attention. I think players are maybe starting to understand, but it's only because the media are really talking about it.
Barry, very quickly, because I want to balance people talking. But like you played, Tommy Kiernan, I remember you coming on for Tommy. Now that's how far back you go. I mean, Rory's story back then, the amateur game when you guys were playing, he would have been looked after. Surely it seems to me the more professional we get, the less we're looking after the players.
Yeah, I don't think that's quite true. I mean, we knew very little about it. The way you were looked after was you were put out for 3 weeks. In the course of 2 years, we've gone from 3 weeks to 5 minutes. This is what is the absolute nonsense. Now, what we have learnt about it is that we do know how to assess a player gradually, but I think Rory might be right, George, that 7 days might turn out not to be long enough now. We might be heading back to the 3 week. And this is something which international federations won't be too happy. We would look after the guys, but we didn't know much about it.
Sorry, do you mind me saying bullshit, Barry, do you? Yeah, I'm
What?
sorry. Hold on here.
Right.
Like, you're the fullback of Manchester University. You're also a doctor, right? Lamont is playing the centre, and he goes down, and he's unconscious. You would have said to him, listen, when the game's over, drop into me in St. Peter's Hospital or wherever the heck you were. He would have come in and said, you say to him, don't play for 3 weeks. Would you not have said that in the old amateur era? So you're trying to tell me now,
And
with billions of money,
neurologist.
and you're telling this audience, with billions of money been spent on our sports here, we can't look after this man. Is that what you're, like, I need a yes or no, and I'll come to you then, Adrian.
No.
Is that what you're saying?
He would be off for 3 weeks. And he would go to a neurologist if he'd been unconscious and had his face fractured as well. But I'm afraid the neurologist didn't know an awful lot about concussion then. It's what Chris Nowinski and his colleagues and Cantu have done in Boston over the last 8 years. You saw what the reply from the NFL guy was. No. It causes no trouble.
All right,
What's that,
Adrian,
8 years ago?
I would like to comment in relation to the baseline testing. I wouldn't like people to think that baseline testing, it's not to be on end all, but certainly I think it is a very important part. Cheating in baseline testing is not as easy as it might appear. It comes down to, one, how good your neuropsychologist is. Also, the degree of baseline testing. I think you just did COG sport. In racing, we use so-called pen and paper testing. When somebody's coming back to be reassessed, they go through the same thing again, but they're independently assessed by a sports physician, and they're two totally independent examinations. They must pass both before they're allowed back by me. So it depends how good your assessment is.
Okay. Now, we have two GAA players here. We have Johnny Gold, GAA footballer, Mark McHugh. You've suffered concussion, Mark. Now, this is the amateur game. As Miola Murray-Hurtig says, the greatest amateur game in the world. So there's no pressure on you guys to come back because there's not a lot of money involved. You're all playing it for fun. No, but it's true. It's an amateur sport, yes? You have a day job. Right, yeah, okay. Enough, yeah. So there's no pressure, not like Rory, it's his life. You don't have that pressure. So what happened to you, your concussion experience?
No, well, I got hit last year in the Ulster final, and I was out cold for, say, about 15-20 seconds. And my personal experience, I got a bad shot on my leg, and I would say only for that, I probably could have played on. And you're saying there that there's no pressure to play on. Every single player in Ireland is going to want to play on, because if you feel right enough to play on. Brian, you said there about the make concussion, whose responsibility? You said the medical staff. I don't know that. Listen, I don't know a whole lot about concussion like these boys do, but I would say every single person needs to know about it. Before I got hit last year, I had no more interest or knowledge within concussion. I did a wee bit of research afterwards because it happened to me, but the younger players these days, unless something happens to you, you have no knowledge of the thing at all. And only, as I said, it happened to me, and I've been up here and I've done a wee bit of research on it. Nobody knows about it, how dangerous it is. We watched Chris's show documentary last night, and it really opened my eyes. I couldn't believe it. Diagnosing concussion is if you see some stars or you see a black spot, that's concussion. Most people think it's just when you're out cold. It's everybody's responsibility, and thankfully we're having these talks for doctors and for your medical staff that they need to train your players and your coaches. I was at that game, Brian, over in Everton a few weeks ago. You were saying, and I saw Andrew Villalobos, and he was just saying, no, leave him on, and you're right. The medical staff was afraid of him. What was happening was that the thing I'd be worried about is it's all right in a senior game where you have a doctor or you have a physician there that can maybe diagnose something. What happens in our minor games or under 16 games where there's no doctors and your manager actually wants, like if it's a star player gets hurt in his head and he gets up and he comes around after 5 minutes, of course he wants to play him. There's no doctors in underage sports. I think somebody said last night at your documentary, Chris, that 95% of these injuries happen at, under the age of maybe 18 years of age.
Mark, can I say something to you? Just for people watching, because it's an amateur sport and so on. When you woke up, did somebody, do they still sort of say, what's the score? I mean, did somebody say to you, what's the score? I mean, what was the kind of, simple, if you like, diagnosis that whether you were with it or not?
Well, I can't remember any of the game at all. And the thing I remember was the warm-up before we even went onto the pitch. It's the only thing I can remember about the game. I came around a wee bit in the second half, and I just remember just looking at my hands. I hadn't a clue where I was. I looked up, and there was 35,000 people at the game, and I said, "Geez, we must be in a big game." And I just says, it must be. I said it must be an Ulster final because there's such a crowd at it. Who did we beat to get here? I couldn't remember.
But was there nobody asking you that kind of question? Do you know where you are? What's the score? I mean,
well, if they asked me, I don't remember. Did they ask me or not? Like I can't remember. My mother said to me at halftime of the game, she came down and spoke to me just to see was I all right. To this day, I can't remember it.
Just another point, you were talking about documentary, and you were talking about, it was the first time you'd heard somebody say to you, a black spot or seeing stars. Like, if you'd read comics, like I did 60 years ago, there was, it's a serious point. I mean, don't we all remember comics where they said, your man was seeing stars? Was that not a very traditional phrase about a guy who got knocked out? I mean, it's surprising to me that you didn't sort of have that understanding of it.
I don't think any players an understanding of within any sport. Maybe I'm wrong, but only for I went to that documentary last night. I would think only for if you're knocked out, that means you're concussed.
Okay, could I ask you another question? I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but like if the coach came to you with a packet of stuff and there was no label on it or there was nothing on it, it was just a red packet, and he said, "Listen, Mark, put that in your tea every day. It'll guarantee 6 points in the Ulster final." Would you take it?
It depends who give it to me. Like if
no, they meant the coach.
The coach.
What team are you? Remind me. The last time I was at an All Ireland was 1956, so I'm not up to date. Who are you playing with?
Donegal.
Right, who's the coach? Donegal. A fella called McGuinness,
Jim
right?
McGuinness, yeah.
Okay, so Jim McGuinness comes up, says, red packet, white powder, stick that in your tea every night. 6 points guaranteed Ulster final. Would you take it?
Probably would, yeah.
No, I'm sorry, Mark. I apologise. No, I do apologise. What I'm trying to say here, and we've got medics here, is these young men who are at the very peak of their profession are not getting enough information. For instance, I think Gordon Darcy should be the poster boy of Irish rugby because when he went on Lions tour, they gave him one of these red bags. And he said, "I'm not taking it. I'm not putting something into my body that I don't know." Do you know what I mean? And Darcy should be talking to kids who are taking creatine and all sorts of crap. And he should be talking to all our schools players. Anyway, I digress. Because Rory is here. What's your story? You better tell me the team.
Dublin. I was presuming you get that judging by Mark's accent.
How would I know something about Dublin? Okay, Dublin. What happened to you?
Just in the All-Ireland final gone by in September against Mayo, I received concussion with 15 minutes to go, and I played on to the very end. So that's what landed me in this stage.
No, Mark didn't know he was concussed, so presumably you didn't know you were concussed.
Yeah, well, you see, that's the kind of... You're harping on there for a while with Mark about that, but I think the kind of critical point there is what Mark says everyone should know about. I agree with Brian when he says it's the medic's responsibility because the player who is concussed, by the nature of concussion, your decision making is evidently impaired. So I think it should be taken out of the hands of the player.
Now, when I watch television in my sport and I watch rugby, I say when it happens, I say your man's concussed. I mean, I remember the Argentina match. The scrum half came back, and you didn't know what year it was. I'm absolutely convinced. But after 5 minutes, but like when people were watching your match. Huge audience, but guts of 1 million people are watching your match. Do you think, look at you and say, Jesus, there's something wrong with your man? Was it that kind of a collision or not?
Well, so I heard the next day. A lot of people said you were blatantly concussed. I could see it just looking at the game.
Really?
But at the time, as Mark says, you don't really remember much, and a lot of it is fuzzy. So it's kind of, you're not really too sure what medical procedures you went through. But we, as Mark says, we're very lucky that we've top class medical.
Yeah, Barry made the point that we were going back in the old days at Manchester. He'd have got you into hospital and you would have seen a neurologist. Did you have a hospital experience after this?
I didn't have a hospital one, no, but I did get looked at by several doctors, and then when I went back
in Croke Park.
Yeah.
But you didn't finish up in A&E or
no,
scans
thankfully
or
not.
any of that sort of stuff?
No.
Well, George, I think, I mean, I'm surprised you didn't copy. He was wearing a blue shirt. He might be from Dublin, right? And so did I. But
I thought he was
aside from that, no, it's Kilmacud Crokes. I think the problem may have been there that you had used all the subs.
That was another.
So the manager,
right.
Jim Gavin, who was the manager of the year, and probably rightfully so, wasn't in a position. They're hanging on late in the match, ends up it's a point. So what do? Take a player off who can actually be in there. The manager's thinking, the coach is thinking, I know he's not great. I know he looks a bit wobbly. He doesn't look like he's going to be able to get to the ball before anyone else. But at least if he's on the pitch, someone has to mark him. And that would have been the thinking. We can't take him off. We take him off, we not. And he would, if there was to be something done about his situation to protect him from further damage, it had to be, again, I would say, it has to be taken out of the coach's hands, and he can have the row with somebody. On Mark's point about underage sport, I think we're getting down to the nitty-gritty here. If Mark took a bag of stuff, as you said, in a red bag, which probably came from Cork, and he was given a red bag from Cork and said, take that, you'll score 6 points, I would be surprised, because I thought all players now were totally familiar with the dangers of taking anything that wasn't prescribed properly by the team doctor in relation to drugs. We see so many fellas are getting done now for 9 months or 2 years or whatever it is for taking over-the-counter medicines for cold. So I'd be surprised to hear that he might take something without the coach. So, you know, if that knowledge is out there about the dangers of drugs in sport, the danger of concussion in sport, and the responsibility comes on the associations down through their clubs and, you know, their whole organisation.
I want to go to Rory Lamont, because he's come a long way for this. Rory, it seems to me, listening, but to Barry particularly, that, and Brian just there, this issue of substitution, the pressure not to go to 14 men, you leave the guy on. Would you favour rolling substitution to take away that pressure or not?
I think we'd have to wait to see, you know, what happens when we get concussion management a little bit better, when we actually have informed consent and the possibility that maybe more players are going to be diagnosed with concussion because the players are educated and understand and will declare themselves.
All right, but are you worried that if we have rolling substitutions, the New Zealanders will find a way to cheat? I mean, I mean that. I mean, the whole idea about the substitution, I was involved when substitution came in, I was a coach, and the whole thing was, oh, they'll cheat. You know, and this is why we had, first of all, it was 3 subs, then we had 5. I mean, isn't cheating at the root of the fact why we don't have rolling substitution? The fear of it.
It appears that might be the reason. But I think that should come secondary to player welfare. Yeah. So if having more substitutions means that players are less likely to be concussed and remain on the field, then maybe you should do that.
I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 with the players. You have an association, haven't you? Rugby Players Association or whatever?
In Scotland, no, we don't.
You have no union?
No. Well, no, there's no players' union at all, believe it or not.
Right, okay. Okay, maybe that's why you're seeking independence. Mark, what about the GPA here? To Rory and yourself, how do you feel the GPA has operated in this crucial area?
I think they're trying their best anyway. They're trying to get as much information to themselves as possible, and they're trying to get it out to the players, you know, with their website and just, you know, leaflets and stuff like that. But you know, it's hard to educate everybody on the situation. it would take something like a talk like this in front of how many players to really properly educate them. Just picking up on a point there, actually, I thought it was you were on about, Brian, about a special doctor for concussion. I think
not a special doctor, but a doctor who is independent from the two teams. I mean, if the doctor working with the team is working with the team all the time, his judgment is obviously it's affected and impaired, and biased by the fact that he wants to be part of a winning setup as well. I don't know if that goes against the doctors.
Quite right, and in fact, research in America has shown that in American football and other sports, the team doctor is employed as an occupational health physician. Occupational health physicians, subconsciously, greatly moral guys, will always, in a 50-50, come down on the side of the company, not on the side of the employee, because the company pays them. This is all subconscious, but it's absolutely true what the lad's saying. I suggested an independent doctor, totally independent of them, 4 years ago at the IRB, and it was...
Rory,
that solves the problem of the rolling substitutions.
Yeah, come through on that, would you please?
Just think if there was an independent doctor, that would also solve the problems of people, I suppose, faking concussion in order to get another substitution in. So that would solve the problem of, would prevent teams cheating in relation to the rolling substitution.
Yeah, it's interesting the way history kind of repeats itself. There was rolling substitution in Gaelic games up to the 1950s. Like, there used to be about 21 subs, and the parish priest just brought them on back and forth because I mean, the priest was invariably the kind of coach or manager or something, and there was rolling substitution. Like, it seems to me, and I want to go back to Barry quickly. It seems to me the more we've learned, or the less we have actually done.
Well, it's again because of, and everybody's mentioned it, but it's education to the players, to the doctors. A lot of the doctors don't know, to the coaches, as well as to teachers and parents, right across the board. Rolling substitutions, let me say this, that if everybody who is suspected of concussion, including those who go now for this 5-minute assessment, if every single one of those taken off, as they should be, and it'd be one every game and a half. So it doesn't make a great difference. It's just like happened to Brian in the French game, that we had used all our subs that day. But it's usually only in the last 10 minutes, and if you have to keep one sub on the bench because you might get a concussion at the end, that is fair enough. But that is the rate that it's running at in professional rugby now.
One every game and a half.
Yeah. So that's 12 substitutes you've got to cover that one.
Yeah, Brian, like Tommy Lawton played for England in the 30s. By the late 1940s, early 50s, we knew there was a connection between heading the ball and brain damage.
Yeah.
We knew that. We knew from Joe Lewis and Max Schmeling and all sorts of heavyweights of the past. We knew there was a connection between getting punched in the head and brain damage. I think it was Edith Summerscale did a huge amount of medical research in the 1950s and 60s. So why has it taken us until 2013 to start talking about it, Brian?
Well, I think going back to Max Schelling and Gene Tunney, those fellas, they were boxing 20 rounds, and it was even before that they used to box until someone almost died when they stopped the fight. It was mad stuff. I think the players of the 30s, 40, I never heard any mention when I was started playing in the 60s. I never heard anyone saying anything to me about Tommy Lawton or John Charles or concussion. The first kind of notice I took of it was more in the 80s when I read stuff about the families of players who had died and who had suffered with dementia maybe late in life or other neurological problems they had. And they were saying things like, did the clubs do enough to protect our dad when he was playing from all those, the heading they did, which, was that sort of stuff, batting ball. And the ball, really, even when I started playing in the 60s, the ball in itself, when it was wet and the lace was on that side, wasn't a very nice experience. And even in training, I've not quite a nightmare, but I think back to when I was training as a kid and when we were doing heading practice, and you were hoping to hell the lace side of the ball didn't come towards you, because when you headed it, you went, oh jeez, I don't really want to do too many of them. Now it's kind of, they're saying from some research in America based on amateur players who are training twice a week and playing one match of the weekend, if they headed the ball more than 1,300 times a year, there is there is some damage.
Okay.
Right. Now, if that's the type of investigation going on, they really need to get into it, professional players, and spread the messages. If you go to the drugs one, the reason why the drugs situation, there's been an impact is teams and people are getting suspended for taking drugs, over-counter stuff for colds and flus. There's an education process going on there. So players are afraid, coaches are afraid, so you can't do that. You can't do that again. So now, if somebody gets a brain injury and the medical people come out and say, this is what happened. Look at the state of some of the boxers in later life. Look at what's happened to some of the players. It's going to take a while for the rugby fellas because the year that has only started 10 years ago. But it needs to come where something serious occurs and people say, now this is what can happen if you don't change the rules.
Rory Lamont, about the actual sort of public relations of the game, right? In this country we have 32, I think at the last count, catastrophically injured players in wheelchairs, right? But they're all men. Right? Increasing number of women are going to play the game, and as night follows day, we're going to have a quadriplegic woman. Also, the prospect of brain damage. Women, in a public relations sense, do you think that if women do it, they will cause a greater damage to the sport or raise the profile? Do you believe that or not?
I don't personally think it'll make much of a difference. I think it's not. It shouldn't even be a consideration in the debate about player welfare, whether it's a woman or a man.
All right.
George,
Yes, Barry,
just
yeah.
very important on this independent doctor, because the IRB will come back and say they have now advised an independent doctor, right, off on the touchline doing the 5-minute assessment. My point is, everybody in sport emphasises any suspicion, any doubt, you come off and you don't go back on. The very fact that you do a 5-minute suspected concussion assessment means that you suspect it. So they can't have it both ways. If you suspect a concussion, you have got to come off. And I would like to say, finally, George, to the IRB and to the IRFU, who every time I say anything or something like this, if it's something they disagree with, they say that's a personal opinion. I'd like to invite the CMO of the IRFU and the CMO of the IRB to meet me, right, and debate with me in front of any of the eminent journalists who are here and in front of any neurologists, preferably Cantu, the one they claim as well. I would like to meet you.
Okay. Yeah, Adrian.
No, I'd like to, I think people must realise that the knowledge of concussion is very, very recent. While Bob Cantu wrote initial guidelines probably 30 years ago, it's a relatively recent science. And while you mentioned about the head injuries 40, 50 years ago, people have no knowledge of the brain, how it functioned. Our knowledge of concussion is very, very recent, within the last 15, 20 years, and then it's evolving very, very rapidly. So I think we must keep that in context.
Okay.
I think blood injuries, as you say, they're allowed 15 minutes, so rugby should be the same. But the most important thing, and the thing I keep stressing, is knowledge transfer. We've got to get the knowledge out there. I think ABI, along with probably our own Faculty of Sports and Exercise Medicine, are probably the best body to get the knowledge out here in Ireland, and I think it's a priority.
All right, our panel have been on for just over 50 minutes, which I think if we could have time to take some questions if people would like it. What I'd like you to do is stand up and when I call you, and give us your name and your association or background so we know sort of where you're coming from. So we'll take that one first, yes?
Thank you. I'm Dr. Rod McLoughlin. I'm the Head of Medical Service at the IRFU.
Right.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Barry for acknowledging our document and the good work that we're doing. The document is only one part of it. And secondly, I'd like to maybe outline the IRFU's position. The IRFU is not asking anyone, doctor, parent, anyone, to make a diagnosis of concussion in 5 minutes. With regards to the pitch side concussion assessment, it is a tool of which there are 4 parts. It is a tool to decide, do you have a suspicion of concussion, not to make a diagnosis. Nobody's been asked to make the diagnosis in the day. The 4 parts involve a video analysis of the game. We have an independent match day doctor at the matches that can overrule either team doctor and that watches what happens and can play back and give that information live to the team doctor if necessary. That's part 1. Part 2 is the on-field visible signs. So the doctor can run out and see things that concern him that he has a suspicion of concussion. That player is then off. Part 3 is the on-field assessment, the discussion and the interaction with the player, looking for some of the things that have been mentioned today. And part 4 is the tool. A player can pass the tool and still be removed from the field of play. If you pass all 4 parts, you can be removed from the field of play, because as we've heard today, it is a clinical diagnosis where the doctor's opinion overrules everything. So let us be clear, just one thing, George.
Yeah.
This is not to make a diagnosis. None of this is to make a diagnosis of concussion. It is, do you have any concern of a suspicion? That is the situation of the RFU and the IRB.
In just one quick question, because obviously you're all over it. In the last 5 years of the Six Nations Championship, how many Irish players have been taken off the field and deemed to be concussed, do you know?
I don't know. I'm recently in this post.
Right.
I think a couple of things. This replaces, in the 2011 World Cup, Rugby World Cup, doctors were on average taking 68 seconds to make a diagnosis, and we're using no formal system. So I think this is a move in the right direction. I'm not trying to suggest that we are at the end of this road. But now doctors are getting 5 minutes to decide, do they have a suspicion? And it's done under the stadium in quiet and peace, not in the pressure game. So personally, I think it's a move in the right direction.
Okay.
I must answer that,
No,
George.
the whole Barry, you've got a fair talk. Yeah, over there. Yes, there, please. Yeah. And I'll take you then as well. Sorry, Barry, but I want to try and get the audience.
That's
Okay,
a valid point.
my name is Cliff Byrne. I'm a maxillofacial surgeon, and I've been involved with the RFU Charitable Trust for about 12 years now. Question for Rory Lamont. Rory, thanks for your honesty and candour. The IRB are running this clinical medical research trial, the 5-minute, pitch side concussion assessment. And, if you run this in a hospital where we all work, it has to go by an ethics committee. So presumably this has gone by an ethics committee. But you did mention on a couple of occasions about players being informed and informed consent. I mean, do you know the level that your colleagues or former professional colleagues are informed, or are there forms that they have to sign to take part in this trial? And, are there waivers involved, or... Because I'm sure this is, big implications for the players themselves who are taking part in this trial.
Rory?
Yeah, well, in terms of signing forms, all I'll say is that at the start of season, when you're with your professional club, you normally get a few forms that you have to sign off. You don't read them. No one reads them. You're just told by your club to sign them. So you sign them. You don't know what you're signing. So I might have signed something for the PSCA. But in terms of, are the players spoken to about it, or are they informed about it? No, the players don't get told anything. And I played in Scotland, France, and England, and at any time in my career were we ever informed about any of the protocols that were being used, or the pros and cons, or just any risk with concussion.
Okay, in the front row.
Kieran McCormick, a doctor in Wexford and also a coach with under-15s rugby. I have a big concern here. Now, we're talking about more or less the professional game here, but I'm involved with the underage amateur game. And when I have a guy who I suspect who is concussed, I say, you're out, gone, 3 weeks, do not want to see you. I go to his parents, I talk to them, this is the situation. But it's coming to my attention more and more. 2 days, 3 days later, they're playing for their school in a GA match, a hurling match, they're playing soccer. And that's how they're filling up the 3 weeks. There is a big gap here. I don't know how to solve this. I'm putting this to the panel, the floor to talk about it.
All right, thank you very much. Was there another question? Can I take that one there, please? And there was another question somewhere else, was there? Right, I'll take that one there, and then I'll go there.
This is for Barry, yourself. My name is Mark Hampton. I come in from 2 different angles. One as a spectator, 3 angles, a parent, and also as a sports clinician in Belfast. For the last lot of years, my son played all the way up through school, and there was hardly a game went by where at least one player, 11 through 18, didn't have a serious concussive illness. The problem with this is they all came off the side. They were seen by coaches, the opposition, and all the rest of it. And next thing, they were back on the field. Not one of them should have returned to the field, but they all went back onto the field. It's no great surprise that that's happening. When I watched last year in the Six Nations, Luke Marshall got poleaxed, totally poleaxed in one game. We were then at the Stadio Flaminio 1 week later, and there he was starting for Ireland again. He got poleaxed again. And we thought, when we walked out of the stadium, Ulster playing Saracens in a couple of weeks' time, and he's off. Next thing, he started for Ulster against Saracens. It was an absolute disgrace. He got his third concussion in a few weeks, and we feared that that would be the end of his career. If, at the top level, a guy's been sent back 1 week after being totally poleaxed and carried off the field, he couldn't get off on his own feet. Yeah. If the parents, the coaches at school are seeing that, it's no surprise that they're sending these kids back on after the thing.
Sorry, just put that in the form of a question. Put that in the form of a question.
Is this not what we're actually talking about here today?
One of the very important things we're talking about, and I think everybody was fairly astounded with Luke Marshall. I wasn't involved in his examination. I don't know what assessments he had, what serial assessments he had. I feel very much if he'd passed that first week and gone back on the second, using the 7-day absolutely perfectly, not a second, he should probably have been out for the season, I think, then, after that. And this is so important. This is where this assessment, we have trivialised it in rugby. In answer to Rod, if you do the pitch side assessment, I don't care whether it's a video, I don't care whether it's you go on one, you suspect concussion. Otherwise, what are your criteria for suspecting concussion? You suspect concussion if you do that test. In every other form that you produce, you say, if we suspect concussion, you're off.
All right, I'm going to take one final question. You there, please.
Owen Hand from I'm actually with a few students who are doing a school project on concussion and the dangers of it. I was just wondering to Brian Carey, would you suggest that maybe the IRFU or the FAI should do a meeting or a committee to discuss the dangers of concussion amongst youths and children?
Well, I'm not quite sure what their system is in the RFU, but in the FAI there was a medical committee which was composed of the doctors who work directly with the underage international teams. Now, I think their work seemed to be around the international teams and the issues involving international players. I have never, it's a few years since I was directly involved with them, with the FAI in any shape or form. I am not aware that they have done any educational process or whether they've taken any responsibility. And I think that, but the associations and the Sports Council, I think on that gentleman's question about, who takes on the responsibility, I think the Sports Council have to take on the responsibility of driving it through the associations, because if you're taking your player off, and it might happen in your school, he's taken off playing in a Gaelic match, but the rugby team or the soccer team use him next week, or maybe he's running on, it's usually a lot of the same people are running the athletics as well. There has to be an education process, and there has to be somebody responsible there who said, and there we have the next problem is club v school, where it's a bit similar to Ulster and Ireland, where it seems like we don't talk to each other. We've got to try and win our match. Tough if you got hurt playing for you. Somebody above needs to drive that process.
Well, I was instructed 60 minutes. It is now 60 minutes, and it's time to call this segment to a close. I have to say, in closing, on a personal level, that there were the guy in charge of wind farms was brought before the Oireachtas committee, and he was asked, would he like to live near a wind thingamabob, and he said, no. Would anybody? I have to say, if somebody asked me, would I want my grandchildren to play rugby, I would say, no, would anybody. My thanks to our guests who've travelled, most of them, to be with us, and for their contributions, honesty, and above all, their striking integrity. Dr. Barry O'Driscoll, Rory Lamont, Rory O'Carroll, Mark McHugh, Brian Kerr, and Dr. Adrian McGoldrick. And especially to you, thank you so much.